G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm of course Acaplus, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Path of Champions Legends Runeterra. We are going to be doing a top 5 video here in POC. I'm going to be giving you my top 5 champions here in Path of Champions. Now first of all, first and foremost, the most important thing to address the elephant in the room. I want to say thank you guys so much for that outpouring support and compassion that you've shown yesterday on the community post. Things haven't been going too smoothly in real life, and essentially I shared a little bit as to why it is so. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for all of that. You know, the care and the concern, the compassion that you have shown to me is really, heartwarming, I would say. And I think to pay back that appreciation, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start more shorter videos. And what I mean by shorter videos is that I'm gonna be doing more guides here on the channel. I'm gonna be doing a couple of top 5 videos as well. That way you guys have much shorter content to watch, and at the same time you also have some valuable content to watch. My plan for guides is essentially to go through every single champion that I have personally played and give you my thoughts on those champions and how to use them. Mainly I'm gonna be using my experience of bringing them into Aurelion Sol, because as we all know, if you've been on the channel for quite some time, I've covered a lot of these champions into Aurelion Sol, so I think I have at the very least a fairly decent grasp or understanding of how that champion works at the ASOL. So I think I'm gonna use that as a benchmark and give you my tips based on my experience. But anyway, coming back to the topic of today's video, I am gonna be giving you my top 5 champions to use and play here in POC. Please note that this is not an in-depth guide. I'm just going to be going really briefly on each champion. I'm also going to assume that you have these champions at star 3 and level 30, although I think the champions that I have personally selected for this list should still function pretty well, even if you're not at the maximum champion level or the maximum star level. Anyway, let's talk about the champion who is at number 5 at the bottom of this list. The champion is going to be Garen. So Garen is arguably one of my favorite champions to play in POC. First of all, he's really easy to use, and secondly, he is definitely a really balanced champion. Now, I know that these are not really good indicators of how good the champion is, but the fact remains that Garen is just a really easy champion to play in my opinion. Assuming you are at star power 3, you're gonna have access to the Mass in Might 2 when an ally strikes granted +2/+2 and Justice +1 starring mana around start create a fleeting single combat in hand. These two powers are obviously really good because you can use singles combat to strike the enemy, in turn giving you a +2/+2 stat buff. And in terms of the relics here, there's just a variety of builds that works really well on Garen here. There's just an overabundance of relics that you can potentially use on the Garen really well, because he's just a really flexible champion. My personal build that I'm running right now is Archangel Staff, King's Crown, and Berserker's Buckle. The idea with this one is that with the Archangel Staff, we're refilling mana every round in order to allow us to play singles combat consistently, and because we are playing singles combat, we're able to get the stat buff not only from the star powers, but in addition to that from the Berserker's Buckle. And with the Garen's attack stat raised to a fairly high level, we're gonna take advantage of King's Crown and the Overwhelm to deal direct damage to the Nexus. Coming in at number 4, we have the Hallowed Seamstress Gwen. So Gwen is also one of my favorite champions to play here in POC. Again, she's just insanely easy to use, and she's also a really aggressive champion. As I mentioned before, the indicators here aren't really a good metric to measuring the efficacy of the champion. In my opinion, Gwen is just a really solid champion overall, especially when you have her at 3 stars, which will of course give you access to Snippets of Song 2, round start summon a Ghastly Band, and Needlework +1 starring mana when your leftmost attack against Power from Hallowed, so does the attacker to its right. Now both of these powers also work insanely well because Ghastly Band will trigger almost every single round. The ephemeral unit, as you can see here, will constantly die, hence giving you a +1 Hallowed buff every single round. That +1 Hallowed is then translated into Needlework, which will essentially give your first and second attacker from the left the Hallowed buff, and if you have Gwen on the board, you can potentially double the Hallowed buff by putting her as the second attacker, or in a situation where you need to clear the board a little bit more, put Gwen as your third attacker to ensure that you have more damage. Like her star powers, there's just a variety of ways to play the Gwen in terms of the relics. My personal favorite build is to go with a Gale Force, a King's Crown, and a Luden's Tempest, though many of you might actually want to swap out the Gale Force for a Krungar Inheritance. The idea with this build that I'm running here is that Gale Force will give us the Scout, which will allow us to attack twice in a turn. Having the Overwhelm will allow us to capitalize off the Hallowed buff, which will of course raise the attack stat of units to an insane level, and the Luden's Tempest is there just to make sure that Gwen will be able to drain 1 extra damage from the enemy Nexus with her skill. Number 3 on this top 5 list is gonna be Annie, yet another easy and aggressive champion to use. Her star powers here are exceptional because Pyromania 2 will allow your spells and skills to deal 2 extra damage, and Playful Trick will create a fleeting Gale in hand. Pyromania 2 is probably the most important here because this can potentially net you a lot of consistent Nexus damage. damage. As with the previous two champions, in terms of relics, Annie is also just a really flexible champion to use. A huge variety of relics works on Annie here. My personal favorite build is the Gale Force, Chase Gun and Luden's Tempest build. The idea with this one is that with the Luden's Tempest, we're essentially allowing every single spell and skill to deal extra 1 damage whenever the Annie is on the board, effectively increasing Pyromania's power from deal 2 to deal 3. In terms of the Chase Gun, whenever you summon the Annie, you get to create 2 warning shots in hand, and warning shots here will capitalize off the amplification of power from the Star Power and the Luden's Tempest, effectively increasing deal 1 to deal 4 direct to the enemy Nexus. As for the Gale Force, the idea with this one is that we're gonna want to constantly summon and resummon the Annie. The strategy here is a little bit cheesy because we're effectively using Chase Gun to nuke the enemy Nexus. Moving on to number 2 on this list, it's yet another one of my favorites. It is Diana. So Diana is yet another easy and aggressive champion to play, especially at the 3rd Star Power here. Her Star Powers are pretty amazing. Outcast Edge 2, allies have Nightfall, grant me +2/+0 and quick attack. If I already have quick attack, grant me double attack instead, and Twilight Offering +1 starring mana. When you play your first card each round, refill 1 mana. Outcast Edge 2 is insanely easy to trigger on Diana because she already has quick attack, and if you're able to trigger it, you're gonna get double attack instead, which is gonna be absolutely necessary for the build that I would recommend here. In terms of Twilight Offering, this essentially operates as a pseudo mana gem because they're able to refill 1 mana every round, effectively allowing you to bring on more units because they're able to get cost reduction on the first card. In terms of the relics here, Diana only needs 2 relics to function really well. The 2 relics I'm talking about here are Gale Force and Droking's Crown. Scout will allow you to attack twice per round, and assuming you have Diana on a double attack, you're able to attack up to 4 times. Having the Droking's Crown is also nice because the Overwhelm will ensure that you're able to clear your blocker and then deal the rest of that damage to the Nexus. If you don't have this relic, you're probably not going to be able to do so, but Diana is still pretty effective without it. I have a Guardian's Orb equipped here because that will allow me to get an extra epic item on 3 random cards in my deck. But again, this is not necessary because all you need are these 2 relics over here. Let's take a look at our honorable mention before we get to number 1. So the honorable mention here is gonna go to LeBlanc, another really decent and aggressive champion, also fairly easy to play. Her star powers here make her probably one of the strongest champion in POC, aside from Diana and of course our next champion. Now in terms of the star powers here, we have Everywhere, Everyone, +1 starring mana. If you've leveled a champion this game, when allies attack, summon an attacking, Ephemeral LeBlanc, and Deceptively Deadly, round start, create a fleeting shot and resolve in hand, it costs 1 less. Now as you can see, I only have 2 stars here, but this is probably not the important power. The most important one and probably the most powerful one is the Everywhere, Everyone. And the reason why this is insanely powerful and important is because of the build that we are gonna run here. As you can see, I have a Gale Force and double Gatebreakers attached, and this is just an excellent way to play the LeBlanc. Double Gatebreakers is obviously gonna allow you to strike the Nexus with her fairly high attack stat, and having the Gale Force here will give you a Scout which will allow you to attack twice, and because you are gonna be attacking twice, you're gonna be summoning Ephemeral LeBlancs on both attacks. One really cool thing to note here as well is that the Ephemeral LeBlancs also will have Gatebreakers, which means upon attacking and summoning them, those Ephemeral LeBlancs will also strike the Nexus, effectively allowing you to deal massive damage upon summoning and attacking with LeBlanc. And last but not least, at number 1, we have surprise, Jinx. So as we all know, Jinx is probably one of the easiest champions to play in POC, and that makes her one of my favorites. For me personally, I'm all about getting the job done. If a champion is easy to use, wins you a lot of games, and can clear adventures quickly, I'm all for that champion, and Jinx is definitely that specific champion. At maximum star powers here, Jinx is absolutely unstoppable. What's the worst that could happen to when you play or discard a card, deal 1 to the enemy Nexus and 1 to a random enemy, and wreak havoc, +1 starring mana. When you level up a champion, create a super mega death rocket in hand. Now in my personal experience, this is probably the better star power of the 2 because they're able to get chip damage onto the Nexus whenever you discard or play a card. Speaking of discarding your entire hand, this is my suggested build for the Jinx. Gale Force, Loose Cannon's Payload, and Curator's Gatebreaker. The Loose Cannon's Payload will allow you to discard your hand every single time you summon the Jinx, thus allowing you to create a super mega death rocket consistently. To trigger this effect consistently, you are gonna want to run Gale Force here that will allow you to constantly recall and resummon the Jinx. This will allow you to constantly trigger Loose Cannon's Payload, which in turn allows you to get a lot of damage onto the enemy Nexus. Once again, these 2 relics are probably the only thing that you need on the Jinx to function well. However, for a 3rd relic, I would personally suggest Curator's Gatebreaker. The idea with this one is that we're able to capitalize off the Gale Force, taking advantage of Jinx's attack stat by using the Gatebreaker to strike the Nexus every time we recall and resummon her onto the board. And there you go, that is my top 5 champions here in POC in regards And there you go, that is my top 5 champions here in POC. Now obviously there are a lot of good champions here in the mode, but in terms of efficiency and efficacy, I find these 5 to be one of the best at what they do. However, as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. I'd love to see what you guys think about my list and what champions do you guys actually prefer to play. Either way, we are gonna end things here, so if you guys enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like as well as subscribing to the channel. I really do appreciate the support, but most importantly, it's so that you don't miss future episodes or uploads of Legends of Runeterra or Path of Champions content just like this one. I will be doing more short form videos like this in future, probably more top 5 videos as well as a resurrection of champion guides. So if you guys have any topics or champions in specific that you'd like me to cover, also leave that down in the comment section down below. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching as well as joining me on this one. This is Keflo signing off. Hopefully I get you guys in the next video. Goodbye.